Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees. Tonight's top story. A recent increase of deaths in young teenage boys raises concerns. No link has been made, but some doctors are calling for more data to determine if the deaths are linked to vaccines. Also tonight, headlines call for an early festive shopping frenzy and threaten no toys at Christmas. But the government says a container logjam at Felixstowe port is no cause for alarm. And Jewish leaders and heads of states call on social media companies to do more to combat anti-Semitism on their platforms. They are meeting at a conference on Holocaust remembrance in Sweden. Analysis of official data shows an increase of deaths in young people, particularly teenage boys, in recent months compared to previous years. A clear link hasn't been made, but some are concerned the increase coincides with the rollout of vaccines to young people and are calling for more detailed data from the Office for National Statistics. Current figures don't break down the data according to vaccination status. Here's NTD's Jane Well with more.
Analysis of official data shows an increase of unexplained deaths in young men in England and Wales, particularly those aged 15 to 19, as well as a rise in ambulance calls for cardiac and respiratory arrest over the same period. Some doctors and scientists want to be sure it's not connected to adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccines, including Dr. Tony Hinton, who's part of the Health Advisory and Recovery team.
We've got these figures for increasing unexplained mortality, particularly in young males, starting from about May time. That happens to coincide with when young males were starting to be vaccinated. Now, that could be complete coincidence. There's also some data looking at ambulance call-outs for cardiac arrests and collapses, which have also been going up for about the same time. Again, which would fit with maybe people having problems such as myocarditis. But we don't know for certain. You know, things happening at the same time doesn't necessarily mean one has been the cause of the other. It could be coincidence, and they're relatively small numbers. So I think it could be cleared up if the ONS released more data.
Data from the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, of deaths registered in England and Wales don't include vaccination status, while ONS data of deaths by vaccination doesn't break down the data into women and men affected. A spokesperson from the ONS said that they've received several requests to break down the data, and they hope that they can provide more information for future releases. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The government responds to media reports of Christmas shortages with assurances that people will be able to get their toys. This comes after the world's largest container shipping company diverts vessels from the UK's busiest port. It's due to a shortage of lorry drivers to take containers away. Brexit and the pandemic saw many Europeans return home, causing worker shortages in the haulage and meat industries. NTD's Natalia Nutting has the story.
The government again responds to media coverage of a supply crisis. Images of containers stacked up at Felixstowe port on Wednesday spark concerns of Christmas shortages. The world's largest container shipping company has diverted vessels from the port due to a lack of lorry drivers to collect the containers.
I'm confident that people will be able to get their toys for Christmas. As I say, I quite understand why people are concerned by these headlines, but we are working through these challenges as we have worked through other challenges.
Conservative Party co-chair Oliver Dowden says the situation is improving at Felixstowe, which handles 36% of the UK's container freight. And the supply chain problems facing the UK are global.
There is, though, clearly a challenging problem, particularly with HGV drivers. And not just here, it's across Europe, Poland, US, even China has this challenge. That's why we've been taking steps to address it, whether it is, for example, with more training, 5,000 more places for training HGV drivers.
Britain is in need of 100,000 lorry drivers, leading to shortages at petrol stations and supermarkets. The causes are widespread, but Brexit and the pandemic saw many European workers leave the UK. British farmers are voicing similar concerns for the meat industry. Pigs are piling up in barns and fields after widespread loss of Eastern European meat workers. This pig farmer in northeast England urges the Prime Minister to lift strict immigration rules for butchers, or risk seeing the pork sector collapse due to a shortage of butchers to process the meat.
It's like pressure we've never had before. Emotionally, it's absolutely draining. Financially, it's crippling. Yeah, we're in a fairly bad place right now. The pig industry are in desperate need of some help.
Making little profit at the best of times, farmers are now losing money on every pig sold. Natalia Nutting, NTD News.
Yesterday's report on the lessons learned from the pandemic was a result of months of examinations starting in October 2020. It aimed to provide a fuller evaluation of the government's response. However, there is no consensus among experts that the report's conclusions are correct. Today, NTD's Malcolm Hudson spoke with Professor Norman Fenton to gain some additional insight.
The report, Coronavirus Lessons Learned, released on Tuesday, said that countries with more rigorous border controls, such as New Zealand, were more successful at containing the virus. The UK's light touch approach, however, only focused on countries such as China and Iran. The report says that many early cases actually came from France and Spain. We asked Professor Norman Fenton what effect better border controls would have had.
I mean, they might have restricted some infected people coming in, but with an airborne virus that was already circulating before, the idea of strict lockdowns, it was only going to delay the inevitable. I mean, of course, if you've got sort of sparsely populated island countries like New Zealand and Australia, they could keep infection numbers very low by locking down hard over a long period. But this was at the expense of almost total loss of civil liberties.
The Lessons Learned report also covered reasons why the lockdown itself was delayed, claiming we should have acted sooner. If we had locked down earlier, would there have been a significant difference in the number of COVID deaths?
Well, no, because, I mean, similar countries applying very different lockdown strategies appear to have very similar outcomes and trends. Most crucially, and this is the key thing that's missing from the debate and was missing from the government analysis, is that there was and appears never to have been any rigorous overall cost-benefit analysis done to support lockdowns.
The report mentioned that a degree of groupthink was a factor in not locking down sooner, since the government agreed with its official scientific advisors. However, commentators have said that groupthink led the government to follow other countries in implementing a lockdown.
Well, actually, I agree with those other commentators here. There's clear evidence of group thinking affecting government decision-making on lockdowns right from the beginning. And as I say, not just Britain, but most countries in the world were in lockstep over this. It's also worth pointing out that the main contributors to this UK government report are the very people who always wanted harsher lockdowns. So you've got that groupthink being repeated in the report itself.
Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Britain is planning to invest more than £500 million to develop the infrastructure of African ports. The Foreign Office's investment arm CDC Group are partnering with the Dubai-based logistics group DP World, who will invest a further £700 million. The initial focus is on modernizing and expanding 3 ports in Egypt, Senegal and Somaliland, with further ports and logistics investments across Africa to follow. Western governments are competing with China, Russia and Middle Eastern powers, including the United Arab Emirates and Turkey, for influence in the area over investment and security concerns. It comes after US President Joe Biden called for a Western-led alternative to Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the projects would provide reliable and honest investment in developing countries, as well as opportunities for British businesses. In other news, Jewish leaders and heads of states are urging social media companies to do more to combat anti-Semitism. They met at a conference on Holocaust remembrance in Sweden, and a recent report found that millions of young people are introduced to anti-Semitism on platforms like TikTok. NTD's Natalia Nutting tells us more.
A Holocaust conference on Wednesday in Sweden focused on how social media contributes to anti-Semitism.
There is a dangerous rise of anti-Semitism all over the world, including Europe, everywhere, mainly because of the new social media. They are doing a good job in inciting and increasing the level of hate. And they have to take responsibility for that, not to remain so-called neutral or objective.
The one-day International Forum on Holocaust Remembrance took place in Malmö. Several heads of state attended, some remotely. A new report by campaign group Hope Not Hate found that anti-Semitic content on social media spiked during the pandemic, and that millions of young people are introduced to anti-Semitism they are unlikely to encounter elsewhere.
We see today in social media, in TikTok, Facebook, Google, all the others, our hatred. But it's very clever hatred. It's not just anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is looked on in a different way as anti-Israel. And why Israel? Because it's an easier target.
Lauder called on children to be better educated. According to a 2020 poll, a quarter of millennials in France said they had never heard of the term Holocaust. Israel's president says social media companies need to do more to remove anti-Semitic material. Sweden's Prime Minister says the hatred of Jews is prevalent everywhere.
It is present in extreme right-wing groups, in parts of the left, in Islamist environments, and among ordinary citizens. We see anti-Semitism among adults and children who have fled to Europe from countries where hatred of Jews is promoted in schools and through state propaganda.
During the forum, the US Secretary of State announced a $1 million program to counter anti-Semitic hate speech online in the Middle East and North Africa. Natalia Nutting, NTD News.
The Imperial War Museum in London is opening its doors to 2 new exhibitions. The Second World War and Holocaust galleries span 2 floors and have more than 3,500 items on display. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us a report.
Here at the Imperial War Museum, after 6 years, they have completed their aim to house both a Second World War and Holocaust gallery under the same roof, the first museum in the world to do so.
The museum says they are bringing together unseen objects, untold stories and unheard voices as the Second World War and the Holocaust pass out of living memory.
What we've done is we've told the true global story of this conflict. It was a world war after all, so we're placing Britain's role very firmly within that wider global context.
They have collated many objects, and over 100 people's stories from around the world feature within the displays. The Enigma machine has become well known through films such as Enigma and the Imitation Game. The museum has one such machine that was used by German armed forces to encipher messages they wanted to send to make them unreadable. But thanks to the team at Bletchley Park, the code was broken and the messages could be read. The World War II and Holocaust galleries are on 2 floors.
Yes, so we have a linking moment between our 2 new sets of galleries, and that's to make clear that there was this link between the Holocaust and the Second World War. And the way we've chosen to do that is to suspend a V1 flying bomb between the 2 galleries. And the reason for that is that the tunnels in which the V1 weapons were constructed, those tunnels were built by Jewish prisoners. And then the weapons themselves were built by slave labourers and, of course, used against civilians here in Britain and also in Antwerp.
The Nazis named the V1 flying bombs revenge weapons after the Allies invaded northwest Europe. They were launched in June 1944, just after D-Day. The V1s targeted mostly the south of England, largely London, killing over 5,000 civilians. However, 20,000 died in the construction of the weapons. To the Allies, the V1 was known as the buzz bomb or doodlebug. Michael, a wartime child evacuee who occasionally visited London on weekends, tells us more about his experience of the V1.
The doodlebug you could hear, didn't often see them, but you could hear, and then when they cut out, you counted the seconds off before they dropped.
The Holocaust Gallery is filled with people's personal stories. It covers the rise of Nazism, the camps and beyond.
And of course, because survivor numbers are dwindling, it's now the museum's responsibility more than ever to be able to tell the individual stories and the stories of what happened to individuals and families and communities across Europe in the Nazi period.
The personal profiles extend to those who played their role in the camps. This man was a commandant at Auschwitz. He claimed in a testimony that 2.5 million were gassed and burned under his command. The gallery ends with the depiction of justice.
This is a remarkably graphic and well-presented exhibition in all ways, engaging and informative with many exhibits. It opens on October 20th. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Imperial War Museum, London.
Still to come, the French government says Britain should expect retaliation measures by the end of next week, as the fishing row continues to escalate. That and more after the break. Britain's fishing row with France is escalating. A French government spokesman says the government is preparing retaliation measures and they could be activated at the end of next week. This comes after Britain refused some small boats' application to fish in British waters. The UK government says they failed to provide some documents. NTD's Eddie Aiken has the story.
France could soon announce retaliation measures against Britain over the fishing row between Paris and London. A government spokesman says President Emmanuel Macron has asked to work on the measures.
Preparations have been made, and we have today several measures that could be put in place if we were to see an obvious and sustained desire not to respect the agreement. These measures could be announced and activated at the end of next week.
Paris is infuriated by London's refusal to grant what it considers the full number of licenses for French fishing boats to operate in UK territorial waters.
The policy of the British authorities is inadmissible and unacceptable because it is not conforming with the Brexit agreement that was signed.
The latest fishing row erupted last month when Britain approved of only 12 of the 47 applications from French small boats. The government said the rest failed to provide the documents required. French fishing industry representatives in response have threatened to block the port of Calais and stop exports to the UK in the run-up to Christmas. A French minister even threatened to turn off the power to Jersey. UK Brexit Minister Lord Frost calls France's accusations unreasonable. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Staying in France, the country wants to be a leader in green hydrogen by 2030 and build new, smaller nuclear reactors. This is part of French President Emmanuel Macron's £25 billion investment plan to revitalise France's innovation and industrial sectors. A key part is environmental goals. He wants to build 2 million electric and hybrid vehicles and even France's first low-carbon aircraft. NTD's Joanne Robson has the story.
French President Macron unveiled his investment plan, dubbed France 2030, on Tuesday, 6 months before the presidential election. Macron says the roadmap will ensure the country massively decarbonises its industry and brings innovation and production in some key areas closer to home.
I would say that the goal of France in 2030 should be this: produce better, live better, understand the world better by serving a French and European humanism. That is at the heart of our message, of our promise, and of what we still have to do in the future.
Macron set out several objectives. The first is to develop small nuclear reactors in France by 2030 with better waste management.
We have to deal with two key issues here: improving safety again and again by lowering costs and reducing waste, which is a key point when we talk about nuclear power.
The plan includes £7 billion to develop energy technology that would help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
The second goal is to become the leader of green hydrogen by 2030. I'm saying that we are fully committed to this. This is really one of the sectors in which we can become the leader.
Macron says the goal of the state-funded France 2030 plan is to boost France's economic growth over the next decade amid growing global competition with China and the United States.
If we Europeans, and in particular the French, want to choose our future, it is essential to win this battle, which is a battle, in a way, for independence and the best quality of life.
He also wants to build nearly 2 million electric and hybrid vehicles by 2030 at a cost of over £3 billion. He says the automotive and aeronautic sectors are at the heart of French industry.
France is a great country of aeronautics. We are going to invest massively in this area so that by 2030 we can deploy the first low-carbon aircraft, which must be a French project. We are launching it, but the objective is to Europeanize it as much as possible.
The plan will also support innovative technology in other sectors, including food production, the film industry and medicine. Macron presents his plan as a continuation of his government policies in the past 4 years to reduce business taxes and encourage hiring and investment. But the wide-ranging plan was swiftly criticised by the opposition, with rivals saying it was electoral campaigning. Joanne Robson, NTD News.
And now to Poland. Following reports over the weekend that the country may be considering leaving the EU. The Polish Prime Minister says Poland has no desire to leave the bloc. He accuses opposition politicians of spreading what he calls lies about a possible Polexit.
Nasza szanowna opozycja próbuje insynuować nam.
Our dear opposition are trying to insinuate that we want to weaken the European Union and Poland by leaving the EU. This is obviously not just fake news, it is something even worse. It is a lie that aims to weaken the European Union.
Kłamstwo wywoływane po to, żeby osłabić Unię Europejską.
During a summit in Hungary on Tuesday, Morawiecki also said Brussels should concentrate on security, stopping terrorism and economic collaboration with other countries. His comments come after the Polish Constitutional Tribunal ruled last week that parts of EU law are incompatible with the country's constitution. The ruling undermines a key tenet of European integration and fueled talk that Poland could one day quit the EU. Going to Italy now. In some areas of Rome, wild boars trotting along the streets are now a common sight. The animals are looking for food waste from overflowing rubbish bins. They can cause traffic accidents and transmit diseases. To keep control of the rising numbers of boars, local authorities are trapping them and selling them for meat. We hear more from NTD's Natalia Nutting.
Park rangers trapped this 170-pound female wild boar just a few miles from Rome. About 1,000 are trapped every year. It's part of an effort by local authorities to get a handle on the rising boar numbers and the problems they bring.
If we don't manage this and we don't reduce, naturally population grow and expand because the carrying capacity of territory can't manage them, and then they go to forward to the city.
In recent years, it has become common in some parts of Rome to see boars trotting along the streets. They emerge from the extensive parks surrounding the city. The animals are attracted to the food scraps from often overflowing rubbish bins. Some parents worry now about leaving their children to walk to school by themselves. Last year, 16 people died in road accidents caused by boars. And they also carry diseases that can be transmitted to humans. The president of a wildlife organization says catching the animals in cages is the most humane way.
We position the cages and we leave food in them for a couple of days, so the animal is used to finding food in the cage. Then the cage is primed to close, and if the animal enters the cage, it is blocked inside.
He says rising numbers are not only a problem for humans. Fauna and other wildlife also suffer from high boar numbers. The fully grown trapped boars are butchered and sold for meat. If they are young, they are kept until they are big enough to be butchered. There are over 2 million wild boars in Italy, up to 15% from before the pandemic. Natalia Nutting, NTD News.
And finally, 9 giant wands are unveiled in central London today to mark the 20th anniversary of the first Harry Potter film. The 15-foot-tall wands in Leicester Square are exact replicas used by characters from the Wizarding franchise. Wand choreographer Paul Harris created fight sequences in one of the films. He recalls director David Yates predicting children would be doing wand battles in years to come.
The only person who saw that really, I think, in the beginning was the director, David Yates, who said, he said, in 10 years' time there'll be kids doing this all over the world. Well, it's 20 years' time and they are. He was absolutely right.
Children from a North London school perfect their swish and flick wand skills under Harris's instruction. The wand installation will tour UK cities next year. The official 20th anniversary of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is on 16th of November and includes special screenings in cinemas across the nation. That's the news for today. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.